The sky hung low and pale above Washington, D.C., that afternoon, the kind of day where the air carried the bite of leftover winter, and the tourists wrapped themselves in light jackets, wandering past monuments that never aged. At 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, things were as they always were, busy, bustling, blank-faced. The gates of the White House stood tall, a wall of black iron against the world, manned by young guards who rotated shifts like gears in a well-oiled political machine. One such guard, a man in his mid-twenties, square-jawed and fresh-faced, had just taken post near the East Gate. New enough to still carry the nervous edge of someone who didn't want to mess up, but confident enough to think he probably wouldn't. He wore his uniform crisp, his earpiece in, his posture perfect. He had memorized all the clearances, all the procedures. Nobody gets through without proper ID. Not even the president, if it ever came to that. That's when he noticed him, the older gentleman, walking toward the gate with a steady, relaxed gait. No entourage, no Secret Service motorcade. Just a man, alone, strolling like he belonged there. Which, technically, he did. Jimmy Carter wasn't the kind of man who needed to be noticed. Even when he was president, he didn't seek the spotlight. And now, years out of office, he had all but disappeared from the red carpets and round-table panels that clung to other former commanders-in-chief like perfume. Carter had chosen a different path. He went back to his roots, to service, to building homes with his bare hands and teaching Bible lessons in a church in Plains, Georgia. No big titles. No dramatic rebrands. Just Jimmy. So when he approached the White House, the place he once governed from, the place his decisions once echoed through, he didn't do it with fanfare. He didn't expect a parade. He expected to walk in. "Excuse me, sir," the guard said, stepping forward, hand raised like a barrier. Carter stopped, mid-step. Not startled. Just politely curious. "I'm going to need to see some identification." There was a moment, the kind of pause that lives in the space between offense and understanding. But Carter, ever the diplomat, smiled kindly and reached into his coat pocket. "Of course," he said, his southern drawl still as gentle as it was during his fireside addresses decades ago. The guard took the ID, looked at it, then looked back up. The wheels in his brain were turning, clunky and slow, like an old PC processing too much data at once. "James Earl Carter, Jr.," he read aloud, mostly to himself. The birth date matched. The name sounded familiar. Too familiar. He looked up again. His eyes scanned the man's face. The age was right. The hair, now silver. The soft jaw. And the smile, that unmistakably humble smile, like the man had seen the world and still chose kindness. The guard blinked. Then blinked again. Slowly, realization began to dawn on him, like a curtain being pulled open. "You're President Carter." Carter's smile widened, almost bashfully. "That's right." And now, the silence. It stretched for a few uncomfortable beats, like the pause before a symphony begins, except instead of music, it was sheer embarrassment that filled the air. The guard, suddenly red-faced, stood straighter. "Sir, I didn't realize. I didn't expect." "It's quite all right," Carter interrupted gently. "You're just doing your job." But that wasn't all. Because somewhere, not far from that scene, other guards had begun to murmur into radios. A former president was at the gate, unannounced, unescorted, and very much real. There were brief moments of confusion, protocols being flipped through, calls made. And even then, Carter waited patiently. No name-dropping, no puffed-up indignation. He didn't remind them that he had once lived inside those very walls, walked those very halls, made decisions in the Situation Room that had shaped the trajectory of nations. He simply stood there, amused, perhaps even grateful that life had come full circle in such a simple way. When the gates finally opened, and the situation was confirmed, the guard apologized profusely. Carter shook his hand. "You handled it well," he said. "Never be afraid to ask questions, even to old men in suits." And with that, he walked through the gates, slowly, with the quiet dignity of a man who had been great, and had chosen, instead of clinging to that greatness, to let it go. There's something poetic in that moment, something quietly defiant against the culture of celebrity and ego. Here was a man who had wielded more power than most people on Earth ever would. A man who had the nuclear codes, led the free world, brokered peace between nations. And yet, when faced with the chance to demand recognition, he chose humility. He had been stopped at the gates of his own legacy, not because he was irrelevant, but because he had chosen to become small again. Purposefully. And in doing so, he became bigger than the office he once held. The story may be funny. It may be awkward. But above all, it's iconic. Because only Jimmy Carter could be mistaken for just another old man at the house he once ruled. And only Jimmy Carter would take it as a compliment.